You've seen the best.
You've seen the worst.
Now here's the rest of both worlds.
I'm GayFesh, and I'm the Anarchy of Lust.
And I'm Ari, and I'm sorry, I have to go now. Bye.
And today we will be discussing the Star Trek The Next Generation episodes Loud as a Whisper and The Schizoid Man.
But before we do that...
Seems like trans rights are under attack in the United States.
Again.
And Star Trek is about infinite diversity and infinite combinations.
Mm-hmm.
We celebrate our differences. We celebrate people who differ from the norm, quote unquote. And as of Star Trek Discovery, Star Trek explicitly says trans rights and trans thriving.
Mm-hmm.
And we just want to reiterate that here.
We do. We support all of our friends and family that are transgender in any way, shape, or form, or how they choose to identify. And we just wanted to make it very clear that that's where we stand, because we 100% love our trans family.
Absolutely.
My own kids are, I fostered a couple trans kids that are still a part of our lives. And they're still my kids. And my own child is non-binary as well. And in the school I work with, I'm a part of the GSA. And I've got to say, this gender non-binary stuff is the future. These kids are going to change the world. Like, I'm so proud of these kids. And it's ridiculous how much people are trying to fight them, like just being themselves and being who they want to be and being strong in that. And I am ready to go to battle for them.
Absolutely. Basically, all of my friends online these days are trans. So it's personal.
It is. And trans rights are human rights, just like gay rights are human rights, just like women's rights are human rights. All of us are people, and we all have the right to thrive and be happy and be supported in who we are. We don't have to be who you want us to be. Trans rights are good for everybody because it breaks that gender binary that forces people into like situations where they treat women differently and stuff like that. This is just a situation where we have to stand up and say this is a human rights violation, and we stand with the people who are trying to fight it, and we fight it ourselves.
Amen.
So today we're going to talk about Loud as a Whisper, which is the 5th episode of the 2nd season of The Next Generation. It first aired on the 9th of January, 1989. And it was written by Jacqueline Zambrano and directed by Larry Shaw.
So in this episode, the Enterprise is transporting a diplomatic negotiator to end a centuries-long conflict on another planet.
Mm-hmm.
And the man that they are bringing aboard is Riva, who is...
just hated by Worf, because everybody who comes on the Enterprise is hated by Worf.
Worf has, like, a particular reason for feeling... I wouldn't say hatred, but he's very uneasy, because Riva is a man who had negotiated several peace treaties between the Federation and the Klingons, and before Riva came around, there was no word in Klingon for peacemaker. So Riva is literally a Klingon word now.
Interesting.
But he's a deaf man, and he communicates through a telepathic chorus of 3 people.
Which I thought was really cool. I thought it was really cool.
There's the scholar, then there was Passion. I don't remember if they had exact names, but there was like the Passion guy who said he was the Anarchy of Lust.
Yes, he's libido, he is passion. Yeah.
That's right. A couple weeks ago at the Super Bowl, Charlie Kirk had tweeted out how the NFL halftime show had just become a sexual anarchy. And I replied to that tweet saying, stop making the NFL sound cool.
Sexual anarchy. The Super Bowl show is always like,
yeah,
strangely sexual. Like, that's weird.
The third chorus member was Harmony.
Was that the lady?
Yeah, that was the lady.
Okay.
Riva is immediately taken to Deanna. I assume probably because she's empathic, and obviously his species has some level of empathic, telepathic connection. That connection becomes very important when, as soon as they beam down to the planet to begin negotiations, one of the members of one of the delegations freaks out, doesn't want the peace, and kills his chorus.
His whole chorus with one shot.
Yeah.
I didn't even know that was possible.
Well, they were standing closely together, and it was cheaper for the special effects budget if it was just
that's
the
how
one
I took
beam
it
that
too.
killed all 3 of them. It's like, do you remember in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie when Green Goblin tosses that grenade that turns all of the board members into skeletons, but Mary Jane, who's like 2 feet away from them, is totally fine? It worked like that.
Yes, I do remember that. That actually happened in an episode of Peacemaker I was watching last night. They blew something up, but all these like delicate pipes and stuff right by the explosion were all together. And I was like, what? But yes, that's what happened.
Oh, actually, going back to Worf being uneasy about the whole situation, Deanna is the one who calls it out. Deanna senses that he feels unease and like starts needling him about it in front of everyone. And I'm just like, I'm sorry, I know you're an empath, but like, I feel like you should get consent before telling everyone, you know, just what another crew member is feeling. Like,
the number one rule of counseling, because I work in a counseling center, is confidentiality.
yeah.
No, and you know, but here's my question. Why would Worf himself as a Starfleet officer hate the word peacemaker, or hate that the Klingons have the word for peacemaker now, or peacekeeper, or whatever?
I don't know. He's probably just trying to deal with the disparate parts of his nature, because he is a Klingon, but he was raised by humans, and so, you know, it's just that internal conflict.
Okay, so it was just supposed to be more of that, like, I'm a Klingon, even though I'm in Starfleet kind of thing that Worf's got going on lately, which I think is way more interesting to his character. You know, I love seeing that conflict. I just was a little, I didn't understand, like, because, like, I mean, I assume that Worf believes in the Starfleet, like, motto. I don't know, the directive, you know, otherwise he wouldn't be a Starfleet officer, right? So I guess that's where my confusion came in.
Yeah, he usually is one of the more hawkish members of the crew. He's the first to suggest firing phasers and whatnot. So he's more aggressive than the other crew members, but he's still Starfleet.
Yeah, that's what I figured. Okay, so did we finish the plot?
No, we didn't. I went back because I remembered the Deanna calling Worf out. Anyway, so the chorus is dead and Riva is deaf. And so they're sitting there trying to figure out a way to communicate with him. And my immediate thought is, why does the universal translator only work for voice?
That's a good point.
Because obviously Data goes and learns Riva's sign language pretty quickly, but like, you know, it's the future. They've got holographic projectors. Picard was like looking at a hologram on his desk at the beginning of the episode.
They could have made a holograph of a translator. Yeah. No,
I'm just saying the universal translator could easily just project hand symbols to translate somebody's words into sign language. So,
how does the universal translator work in Star Trek? I'm realizing now that I'm thinking of the Babelfish in my head or the TARDIS in my head. How does it work on Star Trek?
Pretty much like that, yeah.
Okay.
No, it's, there are some times where like it doesn't work as well, and actually on Enterprise the universal translator is a lot more rudimentary, and so their communications officer is actually a polyglot. She like knows, she's like fluent in 40 languages, and she's really good at picking them up quickly, and I assume she probably did a lot of work in improving the universal translator, but I think it just is able to recognize speech patterns at a very sophisticated degree.
But at that point where, like you're saying, that the computer is so far advanced, there's no reason it wouldn't be able to read hand motions as sign language and interpret it. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, we've got machines can recognize, you know, motion input now. So like in the future, it should. Yeah. No, it seems like an oversight on the part of the writers, just in general, that they wouldn't consider that in the future we would still have deaf people who would even like the deaf community today. There are some who are opposed to cochlear implants because they don't see being deaf as a disability. Yeah. One of the big things that I've heard from deaf people is that we can do everything you can except hear. Yep. For a lot of deaf people, they see the cochlear implant as kind of a dissolution of their community, and I mean, there's so many important parts of culture that come from deaf communities. I mean, like, hey, I was just talking about NFL. The huddle literally came from a deaf college.
Oh, did it? I didn't know that.
Yeah, they huddled so that the other team couldn't see their signs.
Oh, interesting.
So I have to imagine in the future there's still deaf people and sign language still exists. it should have been in the universal translator.
I wondered if that's what they were doing with the conversation with Geordi about replacing his eyes. I was wondering if that was a metaphor for the cochlear implant, because I was roommates with a deaf person for about 2 years. And so I learned a lot about this stuff. Like, I learned that he was forced to learn to speak when he was younger instead of like us learning sign language or whatnot. It was because he's my age. So in his 40s, you know, so back in the 80s, he went to an all-deaf school where they tried to force him to learn to speak and stuff like that. And that's now kind of like gone out of fashion. We don't force deaf kids to learn to speak for our comfort or whatever. And
I
so
think
when
we should teach ASL like standard.
I do
Everyone should
too.
learn
It's
ASL.
really big in the high school I work in. It's the second biggest language after Spanish. So it is out there and people are learning it. It is. Yeah. So in this, so I thought maybe that Geordi thing was like when Pulaski is offering to like basically regrow his eyes with various different tools or whatever. And I wondered if that was supposed to be a metaphor for the cochlear, because it would have been new in the 80s, right? Because I think I remember this is 89. So I remember first hearing about them in the mid 90s. Do you remember when they got?
Don't remember. The first time I was really like learning about them, I think was like in the mid 2000s. There was that YouTube video of the woman who heard for the first time and started crying, and I remember that hit me pretty deep and was like, that's amazing that we've got that. And you know, obviously it's an amazing technology, and any deaf person who wants it should absolutely get it. Nobody should discourage them.
Right.
Specifically with the Geordi thing, I think this episode is actually trying to set up an aborted story arc where they were going to introduce a love interest for Geordi. Okay. And through that arc, like, he was going to decide that he wants to go for the operation because he wants to be able to see her with his own eyes.
Okay.
That doesn't happen because the woman that they cast to be the potential love interest ended up being too goofy of a character for them to see. Like, there's no way Geordi would do this for her. So
okay, that makes sense.
We'll get to her in probably about 10 episodes or so, but
oh, good, it's soon. Okay. Yeah. So after they learn the sign language, Data sits down and learns the sign language. He stands behind the person he's talking to and then signs what the people are saying, even though we've already established that Riva, or it's Riva, right? That he can read lips, and yet Data stands behind anybody he's talking to once he learns language and does the sign language and says the words out loud, even though we know he can read lips. So I thought that was funny.
I actually think that's important because lip reading is imperfect. Particularly like in stressful situations, you're gonna miss a lot. There's a lot of words that look similar. And I think having a sign language translator disambiguates that. I think that was good.
It does make your intention clear. Yeah.
What I thought was weird, though, is that, as you said, he was standing behind. Like, there's like, he's behind Deanna and Picard. And I'm like, you're kind of being like obscured a little bit by their shoulders. Like, you should be standing
up front,
out in the open, so that he can clearly see your hand motions.
Yeah, like the other school that I used to work at, whenever we had to do Zoom meetings, it's weird because you know how in Zoom meetings they usually want you to have your camera on and everybody can see you. But because at the other school we have a deaf teacher, everybody turns their cameras off so that the person who's talking at the time always comes to the front for the person who's doing the interpretation. And it's like when those kinds of things that are so easy to do that I love seeing people like actually like treat deaf people like they're people, because they are, right? Like, it's this whole thing. I mean, knowing Scott for 2 years and hearing how he grew up and having to go to that school and how it was all about we need to make other hearing people comfortable. I really loved seeing in this episode how the deaf character was so much of the focus. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And the actor who plays Riva, Howie Seago, he was the one who actually pitched this episode to the producers. He wanted a disability positive episode. And that's why in the episode, when he sees Geordi's visor, he asks about it, and he says that the visor works for Geordi like his chorus works for him. And
which I thought was such a cool, like, yeah, I thought that was a cool, like, tie.
They explicitly had Geordi say that he doesn't resent the visor or him being blind because they're a part of him. They're who he is, and he wouldn't be who he is without them. So there's no reason to resent them. That was a very disability affirming.
It feels like for 1989 that it was a big deal, right? Like, because I don't remember seeing this kind of stuff when I was younger. I didn't watch Next Generation, so.
I remember some of that stuff like starting. Like, I think there was like a Ghostbusters show in which one of the characters was in a wheelchair. Okay. And I remember whenever you would have like those like ensemble pieces where they would always have, you know, the black kid and the Asian kid and the group of kids, and then there would be the kid in the wheelchair. They'd always do that.
Right. Yeah, that's right. I do remember that from the 80s.
80s, early 90s.
90s, yeah.
More of my recollection, but it seems like that was starting to become a thing there where we were starting to see disabled people more as people and trying to be more inclusive with that.
Well, as somebody who was able-bodied growing up and I'm disabled now because I have a chronic illness, I've always had the chronic illness. It just wasn't, it didn't flare really bad until I got to be about 35. And so I've had to learn to be disabled in a world of able-bodied people, in a world where I didn't realize how ableist I was on a regular basis before. And if I hadn't had my friend Danielle, who was like the strongest person I've ever known, show me how to like be disabled with grace. I have told her many times that once I got sick, I was so glad that I had her because I got to see somebody who had to deal with it her whole. I'm going to cry because she passed away. I'm sorry. But I got to watch her just be so gracious and so loving and so caring about the way she was about her disability. It really helped me be able to be more gracious with people. And if I hadn't had that, I don't know how I would have reacted. And so seeing this kind of media makes me happy,
Well, and when you talk about disability with grace, I mean, she was Miss Wheelchair Washington. So
I know, she was.
Literally a pageant winner for...
Yeah, I know. She was such a lovely person. And she, while she got frustrated about her illness and stuff, she didn't let it define who she was, And so, and we love her. We've talked about her before because she was friends with Will Wheaton and his wife. I always forget her name. I feel so bad. Is it Anne?
Yeah, it sounds familiar.
Okay.
Yeah, Anne sounds right.
And so, like, we've talked about her before, but I love her so much. And so I was thinking about her this whole episode and how I would have loved to have been able to talk to her about this episode.
And speaking of Will Wheaton, while this episode was being filmed, they were shooting Star Trek V, basically at the same lot because they were using a lot of TNG sets. They were redressing them for the movie. And Will Wheaton, having grown up watching Star Trek, was really excited to go and meet Will Shatner when he got told, okay, yeah, Bill is on at lot 5 or whatnot today. If you want to go say hi. He like ran over, introduced himself and was very excited to meet him. And Shatner was a complete ass to him. He was just
why is that not surprising?
He's like, oh, you're the kid on the new show, huh? Yeah. I'd never let a kid on my ship. And that was basically it. That was basically all he said to him and then just ignored him. And Will was crushed because Bill Shatner's like a hero of his. And word got to Gene Roddenberry, and Gene called Will to his office and he's just like, well, Shatner's an asshole. I'm
glad that's what he said.
Don't take it to heart. He's an asshole. We're gonna talk to him. It's not you. And Will's told this story many times. I've heard him tell it. And what really stuck to him is how the rest of the TNG cast, particularly Frakes and Burton, took to him and were like, basically, and particularly because Will Wheaton lived in an abusive home, and so like the TNG cast basically became his family during that time, and so Frakes, he very much feels like he's space dad to him, And I think he's called him Space Dad.
Yeah, I call Carrie Space Mom. A lot of people do, though. Yeah, I'm not the one that made that up. But I mean, Carrie Fisher, we call her Space Mom. So I think it's fitting that Frank's be Space Dad. I think that's perfect.
Back to the episode.
Of course, yes, we sidetracked a little bit. Those are important stories, though. I mean, I don't understand why Shatner feels the need to be such a dick. I couldn't think of a better word. I was trying.
I don't know. I feel like this would be psychoanalyzing to say. Yeah, back to the episode. So Riva is at first he's distraught because his chorus is dead and they were his friends, and he just wants to give up and go home. But they're like, look, we came all this way, and these people are willing to come to the table for talks. And so Deanna decides, well, if Riva's not going to do it, I'm going to do it. And Riva and Deanna have had a rapport this whole time. There was they had like a scene where they had a dinner together, and he actually dismissed his libido translator and
libido translator
just so that they could have one-on-one time. And before he did that, I was just thinking, okay, so that guy translates his libido for him. Is he gonna Deanna for him too?
I had that thought too. I was wondering, but Deanna did not want to sleep with that guy. She made it very clear that she was like, so like, if we get down to business, is that guy gonna be here? She was not down for the threesome. That's for sure.
She's like, look, I'm gonna do this, but I've never done it before, and he's like, well, you're not ready. But then he starts thinking about it, and she talks about their meeting and how he used other ways to communicate with her, and how he can turn his disadvantage into an advantage, which gives him the idea that he's actually going to stay on the planet for several months and teach the two sides sign language, because while they are learning to communicate with him, they will learn better to communicate with each other, which actually I think is a really cool idea.
I thought it was a really cool ending. Yeah, I agree. I thought so too. I know. I liked that ending a lot. I was like, oh, that's actually really sweet. It's sweet and it's poignant because it's like, in order to bridge the gap between two societies, like learning to communicate with each other from the ground up is just a very emotionally intelligent way to handle it, too.
There's one moment right after the chorus has died and Riva is kind of panicking and unable to communicate with anyone. He's signing, but nobody can read it. And right. Picard grabs him by the head and yells, "Listen to me." And I'm like, what are you doing?
Oh, I didn't catch it, but that's so terrible. Yeah. Listen to me.
Obviously, he can read his lips, and he's saying, "Listen, you are not alone. We're here. We are going to help you." And that was able to calm him down a little bit. I just thought the optics of grabbing a deaf man by the ears and yelling, "Listen to me," was like. So also going to Pulaski, because Pulaski had talked to Geordi about a potential different way, replacing his visor with ocular implants, or possibly just growing him new eyes in the replicator. But she had also examined Riva, and because after the chorus died, they were like, well, is there a medical solution here? Can we help him to hear? And I'm just like, even if you were able to fix the part of his brain that, because he's not, because his deafness is genetic and it's not anything to do with his ears. His brain cannot process audio signals. Even if they were able to do brain surgery and repair that wouldn't help, because he's been deaf his whole life. And if you did that, he would just be overwhelmed with new sensory data that he would have no way how to process.
And then you have to learn to process it and learn a language and everything. Yeah, it's not going to help into the situation at all, but that's a very able-bodied way to look at it. Can we bring him to our level to make this even or whatever? Yeah. Oh, I really, really loved his sweater. or coat, or I call everything a sweater, but did you pay attention to it? It had like these big these cuffs like off of his sleeves that like made like ruffles, and I was like, man, if I ever wanted to cosplay, I'm always constantly like making fun of the outfits, but I loved this sweater. I thought it was so cool looking. And then one of his guys, not the libido one, but the other one, also had the scholar. He had bits of that same like ruffles on his sleeves, and I thought there might have been a lot of thought put into the costume designing on this particular episode, but there was no talk about it, so I didn't get whether it was I didn't get to confirm whether or not there was anything that mattered about their outfits, but I thought there seemed to be some thought behind it.
I just saw, that's a bunch of white clothing.
It is. Yeah. And then Riva had the big gray like coat thing. That's what I'm talking about. I really liked that.
There was one thing in there that I thought was weird, and it was when they made allusions to the Hanover royal family with hemophilia, and said that Riva's genetic line is all deaf.
Yeah.
But comparing it to a royal family, which is the product of inbreeding, I'm like, are we really going to be justifying royal inbreeding in this episode about disability rights? Is that what it is?
Oh, yeah, that is. I had not really thought about it because I thought of it as kind of like a throwaway line. But yeah, that is weird.
Yeah.
Like, because that's different than an actual like evolutionary disability or genetic or whatever. Because like with mine, the thing that I have, it's a genetic thing, right? Like it's at the core of my DNA for the collagen in my body. And there's no changing that unless they come to the place, in the Star Trek times where they can, change the core DNA like structure of collagen inside of my body. But that's not because of inbreeding. There's other things that are caused by inbreeding.
Yeah, and especially like in the deaf community, I mean, there are people who are genetically deaf who have genetically deaf offspring, but that's not inbreeding. That's just one of their traits.
Right, right.
And I think they would have done better to make an allusion to that rather than specifically an instance where inbreeding was causing recessive traits to compound.
I agree, yeah. I was really completely shocked when the chorus got killed, as a side note. I wasn't expecting it. When we went down, I was like, oh, it's an original series set. Someone's going to die. Like my notes say TOS set, people are going to die. And I didn't really think about who it would be. Like, and I was writing something down. Oh, I was writing, why do I want to hate Riva? Like, this is actually a question we should talk about. But I was writing, why do I want to? And then it says, what in the F is people? Like I was not expecting it. I just all of a sudden that one guy shot him and I was like, oh my God, they're dead. It was like really it was shocking. But I kind of liked it.
They should have listened to Worf. There is a YouTube compilation of all of the times Worf has made suggestions and has been shot down. And they're usually security concerns, and he's often vindicated in his suggestion, but they always shoot him down. And in this episode, he's like, let's take a security team down with, and Riva is like, no, less people the better. Which Riva does admit that it was his arrogance that he thought he could just go down there with a minimal compliment and just rely on his reputation to resolve the matter. And obviously that didn't work out, and his friends paid the price.
Yeah. I mean, and we keep saying friends, but like they've been with him his whole life, right? Yeah. So almost more like family, like it would be so hard to lose three people that had been by your side your whole life. And he did such a good job of expressing that frustration. And I think his response to be like, well, screw this, I'm not going to help this negotiation because I have to go deal with my own stuff was completely human and completely normal response.
No, nobody would blame him for giving up.
But why did I feel like the show was trying to make me dislike Riva? Like there was actually nothing wrong with him, but there was this feeling, like this tone. There wasn't anything specific, but it was like I was always constantly on edge around him. Maybe I was just waiting for him to be the monster of the week or whatever, and that's why.
I think there was, and I don't know how much of this was intentional, but I think there was like an aloof detachedness to him, and part of that is just other people are speaking in his voice, so it feels like you're a little distant from him. But also, he is arrogant, and pay the price for his arrogance in the episode. So I think that was a deliberate character choice.
Do we ever see Riva again?
No, it's very rare that we have recurring characters in Star Trek, particularly from the early seasons.
I kind of liked him. I mean, once I got to the end of the episode and everything, I liked him, and I kind of wondered if him and Deanna ever ended up hooking up or not. But I think everything was so action packed. I don't think they ever got a chance.
No, I think they probably would have if he hadn't been called to the bridge once they arrived at the planet.
Oh, yeah.
Because they were in the middle of dinner, and then Picard calls, and she's like, "Oh, you're needed on the bridge." But I have a feeling if duty hadn't called, they would have done their duty another way.
And on that, I guess it's time to talk about the next episode.
Yeah, let's move on.
So the second episode we're going to talk about today is called The Schizoid Man. I don't think we say that anymore, right? Like my mom used to say that word, but I don't think I say that word. I don't think I've ever said that word.
It's outdated, yes.
Okay. It's the 6th episode of the second season. It aired on the 23rd of January, 1989. The teleplay was by Tracy Torme, and the story was by Richard Manning and Hans Beimler, and it was directed by Les Landau. So those are all people we've seen before. So this is like a core people episode. Yeah.
And this show starts with the perfect example of why not everyone can make a show better by growing the beard. Data has Geordi and Troy come to his quarters because he wants to show off his brand new beard that he's grown. And
my notes say Data has a new image because that's what they said, and then in all capitals it says I was not prepared.
It is.
I had to pause the TV, as you know, because I sent you a picture of my TV, and I was like, "Oh my god, I can't breathe."
It's hideous.
It's so bad.
It's. I mean, it's the same. It's the same color as his hair for the most part, but like, I guess I just didn't really notice how much that clashes with his skin tone, because when it's in his hair, it's just back. You could kind of treat it like a hat, you know. But on his face, it's like, oh no, your skin is way too pale for a beard that dark.
Oh, I know. He looked exactly like my ex-boyfriend too. But no, I just was like, I love these. This episode all in general, though, had a lot of comedy in it that was pretty good. But that beard, man, and it was clearly them poking fun at the fact that Riker suddenly had a beard, right? Like they probably had those first 5 written, and then Riker came with the beard, and they decided to keep it, and they were like, oh, we got to throw something into cold open about Riker's beard.
Well, obviously Data was inspired by Riker to grow the beard, so
yeah, obviously, yes. And then of course it was my joke at the beginning of the episode, but like Deanna's, I'm sorry, I gotta go now, bye. Like, and she just leaves as fast as she can out of the room. It was my favorite. I don't know. I think it is my favorite open. The other one I loved was the one with the sex joke and Geordi and Deanna's staring googly eyes at Bill, right? But I think this one takes the cake.
There's I don't remember what season it is, but I think my favorite cold open of any Star Trek The Next Generation episode is it just starts with ship's counselor log, stardate whatever. My mother is aboard. And that's it. It's just like, yes, thank you. That is the perfect way to start this episode.
So I take it that Luxana is back.
Yeah, she is a recurring character, so.
Oh. Okay, so we got to tell the plot of this one, but before we do, the character, the woman, her name, Briannon. She said, thank God. And I was like, what God are you thanking? Like, I don't think I've ever heard that term in Star Trek before. It like threw me off really bad. I was like, what?
It's just a colloquialism. I mean, I say thank God, and I'm an atheist, so.
I say it too. I just had not heard it in Star Trek yet. You know, I was like, oh, weird. Do you believe in a God, alien lady? Like, are you human? Like, what are you?
I'm pretty sure
you
she
know?
was human. Yeah.
Okay.
So the Enterprise receives a distress call from a planet where a scientist dude is living, and they're like, oh, well, he's like one of the Federation's brightest minds. We better go there right away, make sure he's okay.
But the distress call did not come from him.
It came from his assistant.
It came from his pretty assistant, yes.
Yes. And so they get there, And as they're arriving, there's like a distress call from another ship, and so they're like, oh well, there's like thousands of people on that ship. We got to go there instead. So they just beam down like an away team and then head off immediately. And because like Pulaski's like, well, I'm more needed over there, so they send down a Vulcan doctor instead
that we've never seen before. Yeah.
Who's played by Susie Plaxon, who plays. This is not her most memorable role because she's just kind of playing a stoic Vulcan, which really doesn't capitalize on her talents as an actor. She's going to be playing a Klingon in a couple episodes here who you're going to love. Yay. And on Star Trek Voyager, she played Female Q. Female Q.
Okay, I didn't know there was a Female Q.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember that episode, but she's very sassy and
it kind of sounds familiar. But yeah, I mean, I watched Voyager in 1998 or whatever, and I was barely paying attention.
Did you ever watch How I Met Your Mother?
Yeah.
She played Marshall's mom.
Oh, she's also on American Horror Story.
Oh, okay.
No, not Marshall's mom. I'm thinking of Barney's mom. I'm confusing her with Barney's mom. Barney's mom is on American Horror Story. Marshall's mom, I can see her in my head now. Okay, yes. Okay, I'm with you. Oh, that's interesting. So yeah, she's somebody that continued to keep working after Next Generation, obviously.
Yeah.
Okay, so they get down there and they're beamed into his house, I think, right? Yeah. Like they just get straight down into Mr. Jerkface's house. I don't remember his name.
Ira Graves. Did you recognize the actor for Ira Graves?
He seemed familiar and I didn't know why.
So his name is Morgan Shepherd. You absolutely have seen him in things. You probably know him better by his son, Mark Shepherd.
Oh! From Battlestar Galactica.
Battlestar Galactica, Doctor
Supernatural.
Who. Actually, in the episode of Doctor Who that he was in, Morgan Shepherd played the older version of him.
The one that brings the stuff to them at the lake, right? Yeah. That's what you're talking about? That's him, right?
That was the same actor.
Oh my gosh. Yes, it's the one where the astronaut kills the doctor.
Yep.
And then Mark Shepherd plays Nixon's FBI guy. Yeah. Yep. Oh my gosh, that's so cool. That's so cool. I love I'm a huge Supernatural person, and yeah, obviously I love Doctor Who because we talk about it all the time.
And even here, like in this episode, this is like obviously I think Morgan Shepherd died like a couple years ago, but like even in this episode 30 years ago, he looks like he's on death's door, and some of that might have been makeup, but also that dude just has looked old forever. And I think it's the teeth. He's always had weird teeth. I think he's missing his like incisors or something.
Yeah, I thought like he looked like an old man who had taken his dentures out at one point, and that's what it looked like. You know, it's funny, my friend Ken, Ken, he works at a hotel, and one time like 5, 6, 7 years ago, he texted me and he's like, hey, do you know what a Crowley is? And I was like, from Supernatural? And he's like, yeah, some guy named Mark Shepherd is here in the hotel and people keep asking for autographs. And I was wondering if you know who he is. And I was like, yes. I was like, do you remember the lawyer from Battlestar Galactica? Because that was the one he had watched that I knew that he had known him from. And he's like, oh, he's the lawyer from Battlestar Galactica. Yeah. So anyway, I'm on a large Mark Shepherd tangent, but that's so cool.
I was going to bring it up because I was like, oh, well, we both love Mark Shepherd. And he's the voice of BBC America, right? Like he does all of the interstitials between episodes and stuff.
It's been a long time since I've had cable, but yes, I think so.
And actually, Morgan Shepherd has done other things in Star Trek. Actually, I think he was in Star Trek 2009. He played the racist member of the Vulcan Science Academy who mentioned Spock's disadvantage of being half human.
Is 2009 the original one? Like just the one that's called Star Trek?
Yeah, it's just called Star Trek, J.J. Abrams.
Okay. Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I'm trying to place that part of the movie. I've seen it several times, but I think what really stands out is
Star Trek role, yeah.
Is it? Okay. Is he still alive or did he?
No, he's really a couple years ago, I think.
Yeah, okay. So they get down, he's a giant sexist because
women aren't people, they're women.
Right. I think I texted you that in all caps.
Yeah, you told me that you hate You found somebody that you hate more than Sunny from the Neutral Zone.
I hate him more than Sunny, but he and Sunny can like go, fly off into a star together.
They can go hunt for some low mileage pit woofies together.
Low mileage pit woofies. I'm still laughing about that.
By the way, like I looked that up, and pit woofie is a groupie. And low mileage means young. So basically looking for like a 18-year-old groupie.
No, that's so awful. Yeah. So then they get down there. And we keep getting distracted by it. But I'm so excited about the Mark Shepard thing still. And so they get down there and it turns out he's a big jerk. And she called because he doesn't like doctors.
But it turns out he's got a terminal illness.
As much as the Mandalorian doesn't like droids, because they say it over and over again.
But Graves is able to instantly recognize that Data was built by Noonien Soong. Of course, we don't know this at the time, but later you find out that Noonien Soong literally has the same face as Data. He patterned Data and lore after himself. But so that's how he was able to determine.
That's how he knew, because he said something like "soon," of course, and I assumed just because he was such an advanced android is what he meant.
Well, but also he kind of basically takes credit for everything Soong's ever done. He's just like, I taught him everything he knows. Yeah. So that kind of makes me your grandfather. And Data starts calling him grandpa, and it's a really weird thing.
It's really weird.
And this is the second time we've had a Wizard of Oz reference
specifically
about Data, because Ira Graves is whistling If I Only Had a Heart. And Data doesn't know it, and I'm just like, how does Data not know Wizard of Oz, but Armis does? And
I was today years old when I learned it was called If I Only Had a Heart, because I would have put money on the fact that I thought that song was called If I Only Had a Brain.
They're both songs. They use the same melody.
Oh, they're two different songs?
Yeah, they both have their own song, and they just use the same melody.
I had never tracked that. You know what? I have not actually sat down and watched The Wizard of Oz since it used to play over 2 nights when I was like 5 years old.
I watched it like 5 years ago with my ex, and we were just like, well, that didn't hold up. That's one of the reasons I haven't gone back to watch it. But yes, here we are once again with another Tin Man reference to Data. And this time I was a little bit more forgiving about it because it fit a little bit better than Armis's as a human who was singing it. So, and obviously it's a pop culture reference for humanity because humans made it. But we find out that Graves has developed a method to transfer his mind to a machine. And
as soon as he said that,
and then he starts talking to Data about mortality, and Data mentions how he has an off switch, and
then we cut to black. Yeah.
Well, he mentions the off switch in a way to try and relate to Ira, because he's like, well, if I'm turned off, I'm effectively dead, unless I'm turned back on, I cease to exist. But as soon as Ira hears that he's got an off switch and he's got this whole contraption where he can transfer his mind to a machine, he's just like, now where would Soong put that off switch, I wonder? And then the very next scene, Data walks into the next room with everyone. He's like, Ira Graves is dead. He passed away in my arms.
And then no one, like the entire crew, doesn't figure it out for like the whole episode.
They start suspecting pretty quickly, because Data is like, we will honor his burial wishes, won't we? And then like he gives like this really like a disgustingly indulgent
what was the eulogy. Line? I don't think I wrote it down, but
to know him is to love him, is to know him.
Is to know him.
Those who knew him loved him, and those who did not know him loved him from a distance. And then Picard's like, shut the up, Data. That's it. You're done.
Like, that was, you know what? This was some of my favorite Brent Spiner acting, though. I loved it. He was so good at it. Yeah.
I also loved that touch where, like, Wesley was, like, the only one taken by the speech. He's like, Data, that was incredible. To know him is to love him, is to know him. And I was just like, oh, kid, you're 15.
I know. Okay, so then they shoot him into space, and do we talk about that now, or do we want to finish the plot? Because I have strong feelings about shooting people into space. So one of my biggest fears, and this is going to sound so stupid, one of my biggest fears is being lost in the vacuum of space. I have watched too many space movies where people just go flying off into forever, and you're like,
a horrifying movie. You've seen Gravity, right?
Yes. Yeah. And I have had this fear for a long time of the vast openness of space because of space movies where people go flying off. Like,
you want to go to space.
I do. I still want to go to space anyway. But like Frank Poole, when it's like, okay, goodbye, dead guy, and they just fling him off into the air in 2001. Oh, that's right. We still haven't watched that. Like, I'm like, oh God, goodbye. And then people are like, hey, if you read the books, he comes back 3,000 years later after floating in space for 3,000 years. And I'm like, what? Why? That sounds horrifying. So I'm really afraid of this. And so the idea of taking dead people and jettisoning them off into space is horrifying to me. Like, that being your final resting place. Plus, how many dead bodies are floating around in space? Like, what if you're like warping somewhere and you run into someone's coffin?
So, if we're going to just talk about burial practices here, I've often found that the idea of like embalming bodies so that they don't decay is actually on like kind of an ethical level. I disagree with it because there's
it's so weird.
The burial practices of it's either Nepal or Tibet. I think it's Nepal. But it's up in the Himalayas where there's a layer of permafrost and you cannot bury 6 feet deep. You just won't get through.
Right.
They have a practice called the sky burial where they will take the corpse to an open field, butcher it, and leave it for the vultures. And I've seen a video of it being done, and it's gruesome because they're butchering a corpse and then the vultures pick it clean. But
right.
As gruesome as that is, I actually think it's a very beautiful way to return to the earth. It's you're not like a body's a body. I don't really hold any strong sentimental value on a corpse. I'm kind of Klingon in that way, but it's material that if we embalm it and put it in a coffin to make sure that nothing ever happens to it, we're just removing that material from the earth. We're removing it from the ecosystem. So like I like the ideas of people like my next door neighbor died a couple years ago from leukemia, and he's a tree now.
I was just going to bring up the tree thing. Yeah. I used to be very against cremation. I was raised Christian, and I wouldn't be able to be raised when Jesus comes back if I was cremated. And this used to scare the crap out of me because when you're very young, a lot of religious stuff is very scary. And especially when you don't have a lot of context to put it into. So I like the movie Gattaca, when the guy gets into the furnace. I had nightmares for weeks. Like it's almost as bad as the space nightmares I have sometimes. But like the idea of cremating myself, like I'd never wanted to be cremated. And then I became Buddhist and I started trying to rectify why it was okay for them. Like why they wanted, because traditionally Buddhists are cremated.
Right. Funeral pyre.
Yeah. And so I still don't know where I stand, but like I used to have this hard and fast rule. If I ever die, do not cremate me. I want to be buried in the ground like a normal person. But then I started realizing, quote, like a normal person is more like just like in America now, this weird thing, like you're talking about embalming and stuff. So strange, but I've like had to get used to it because I'm not my body. I definitely don't feel like I'm my body. And that's become more and more a part of my life since my disability too. Which brings us to the next plot point, because I was going to talk about this, which is that obviously Graves takes over Data's body and he's walking around, and he is, because he had a terminal illness and now he has extended his life and not telling anybody, and being kind of a jerk still. He's obviously in love with Briannon, but he doesn't know how to be kind to anybody, because they make it clear that while he's in Data, he's still a sexist. He's still making googly eyes at women and stuff as they walk by.
He tries to connect to her, like he tells her that he's Graves, and he says that, now that he's figured out how to do this, he can build her an android body and put her into it and they can live together forever. And she's just like, this is wrong. I don't want to do that. This isn't natural. And I can understand somebody saying, I don't want to live forever. I kind of don't want to live forever. That actually kind of sounds terrifying in some way. And Star Trek kind of falls in on this, that life being finite gives it a little more meaning. Actually, yes, the Good Place touched on that.
I was just going to say, let's, spoiler alert, we're going to talk about the Good Place ending, because that was what I was just going to bring up too, because there's, in the finale of the Good Place, and seriously, if you haven't watched it, you should like skip forward a few seconds, because I don't want to ruin it for people, but in the finale of the Good Place, there's like several different ways that people say goodbye. Like some people are ready to go sooner than other people. Chidi was ready to go sooner than Eleanor, right? But Tahani is never ready to go. Like, Tahani stays behind and continues to rework the Good Place system. And I am definitely Tahani.
She had spent most of her life just being a socialite and not really accomplishing much other than befriending rich people so that she could name drop them later. In the afterlife, she learns woodworking from Nick Offerman. And she learns all this stuff, and she discovers how to help other people in new ways. And
even after doing that for however many like eons, it feels like she still wants to continue to do it. And I think that would be me. I don't know. I think I don't want to be immortal on this planet in this body, but I do want to keep going on. But like, this brings up the whole, like, we don't know what happens in the afterlife. And I mean, if we want to get real here, I have a fear of the afterlife and not knowing what happens afterwards, because like I said, I was raised in a very religious household, and from the age that I could remember, I very much thought I knew what was going to happen after death. And I very much, like, my mom tells stories about how when I was 8 years old, I would tell her we should just step out in front of a bus because we were just going to go to heaven anyway. Like, I was that secure.
I had thoughts about that too, yeah.
I think when you're raised in an environment where this world is nothing and you're just waiting to go to heaven and all this kind of stuff, it makes this world seem like, well, why are we even here? Right?
Yeah.
Anyway, all of this to say that, like, so what is beyond? And in his own way, Graves kind of got to see what is beyond, right? I mean, he got to be a part of his own funeral. He got to kind of like walk around in a younger man's body. Like, it's the dream that everybody has. But as a person, and I've mentioned before on this podcast that, like, if I had a robot body that I could pick, I would pick a Westworld body to get out of my body that has all this pain and illness and everything. And so I was really conflicted, because as much as I hated not Sonny, what was his name? Graves. As much as I hated Graves, I had so much sympathy, empathy, which one that is, for his situation as somebody else who struggles with a chronic illness. You know, I was like, there has to be a solution here where he doesn't just have to die, but like, why can't we put him inside of a different robot like Lore or another robot that exists and allow him to continue to do his work? Because that was the whole point of the episode, was he's so important, he needs to be allowed to continue to do his work, right?
Well, and that actually ties into Star Trek Picard. I just released a YouTube video where I just recapped the events of the first season, because
you did.
Season 2 is about to come out,
which is on your YouTube channel. What's the title of your YouTube channel?
It's just called GayFesh, and the episode is called "Why Star Trek Picard Season 1 Needs Work." And but in that season, I mean, you saw it, you don't really remember it, but
I was only half paying attention to it and didn't know the characters.
But one of the big storylines is that Picard has a terminal brain abnormality and dies at the end of the season, but they're able to transfer his consciousness to an android body. Now, it's an android body that does not already have a consciousness on it, so there's no ethical issues there. And they don't make it an immortal android body. They say, no, you'll just live out like the rest of your natural life as if you didn't have that brain abnormality. And it's not, he doesn't have any of the data strength or anything like that. He's just himself again. He's
just him in a body like his own body. Yeah.
Having watched Picard that himself, recently,
I know, right? Because he looks at Graves and says, "You've cheated it. You can't do this. This isn't okay. You cheated death. This isn't how you're supposed to do it."
No, I think he specifically was talking about how Graves usurped data, because
Because he's thinking with his emotional brain and not his logical brain.
Well, no. He because Data was still in there. Data is a person. Data has his own rights. Data has his own rights to exist. And Graves being imprinted on top of him, like they do a psych test, and Deanna determines, look, if we don't do something soon, this new personality is going to erase Data.
Which is the only reason it became so, like, stressful, because they were like, the longer that man stayed inside of Data, the more Data could be erased. But like, ethically, my question that I had while I was watching it, well, for one thing, my notes say in all capitals, if I ever have the opportunity, yes, please put me in a machine.
What really drives Graves to actually realize his error and to relinquish control of Data's body is he's not in full control of Data's body. Like, it's strength. He I don't remember his assistant's name, Briannon. He accidentally breaks her hand by squeezing it too hard. He knocks out both Geordi and Picard with just, a simple
and he keeps calling them accidents.
Yeah, he calls them accidents, but after he knocks Picard out in a way where I'm looking at that, I'm like, you could have broken his neck, dude. He realizes how many more accidents are there going to be.
I realized he was going to kill somebody when he used the term lady killer, and Data said, oh, you condone murder. I was like, oh, he's going to kill somebody. Yeah.
No, that's a good setup. I didn't put that together. But no, he realizes that he can't go on because he's not in control, and he's got anger issues that in this body he could easily kill someone. So he just takes matters into his own hands and transfers himself off of Data. He puts himself into the ship's computer, but they mention his personality isn't in the ship's computer because, God, that would be awful. But all of his knowledge is, so they haven't lost like his years of research and knowledge.
Wouldn't it be terrible if it was like in Solo when Leet or whatever her name was downloaded herself into the Falcon, and it turned out that was the attitude that 3PO was talking about in the original movies?
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be terrible if like later on they're like, oh, this ship has a sexist, stupid attitude. I guess we found Graves in here.
There's an episode of the animated series. I don't remember exactly what causes it, but like I think it was called The Practical Joker, and I think like either like some alien entity invades the ship's computer or someone reprograms the ship's computer to start like pulling pranks on people.
Okay.
And one of them, like, people start laughing at Kirk behind his back. He's like, what's going on? And then he turns around and then he notices that the ship has written Kirk as a jerk on the back of his uniform.
Okay, I like that. And then he sacrifices himself and he goes into the computer. I mean, overall, and it's interesting that you bring up that Picard thing, because I had literally forgotten about that part of the end of Picard because, like I said, I was only half paying attention. But it is interesting because basically Picard ends up doing the same thing, except for the body that he's being put into doesn't have like 10 years of consciousness, right? Mm-hmm. Because how old is Data? Because this episode threw me off when Wesley said, you're about my age.
Data has been in Starfleet for about 15 years at this point, I think, or something to that effect. So, and I assume he entered the academy shortly after being discovered. He's like at late teens.
Yeah, I mean, because he said, you'll understand when you're old like me, young fellow, to Will, and he's like, you're my age. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. How about when, I think it was Brianne or whatever. Why can't we get her name right? It's because she had two names. It was like Keenan, Briannon or something. And they switched between the two the whole time, and it kept throwing me off. She asked Worf if he was a Romulan.
She's been on this planet like basically her whole life, and she hasn't met any other aliens. But of course, she picks the most insulting alien race to assume Worf is. Like,
and does Worf have a last name?
No.
Because this episode, he called him Mr. Klingon, and I laughed. I was like, what if his name really is Worf Klingon?
So Klingons will tend to do patrilineal names. Like Worf's full name would be Worf, son of Moog. Which gets established more later in the show. Actually, I think we might be coming up on that soon here. No, his name is just Worf.
Just Worf, okay. He called Laura, or not Lore. I had Laura
Data.
on my mind. He called Data ugly. And I thought that was really funny too, because he's like, yes, you have no aesthetic value. now that I know that that's is soon or looks like soon. Looks
Soong.
Soong with a G at the end. Okay.
With a G at the end.
Now that I know that he's supposed to look like him, he's insulting his fellow cybernetics person or whatever. I thought that was so funny. And now it's funnier now that I know that. I really thought that when he was describing what it was like to just go on, just existing, never really feeling. I was like, he's just describing the human condition, though. Like, a lot of people just exist. Like, we get into these, we have to, like, go to work to put a roof over our head, to put food in our bellies. Sometimes it is just existing. And I thought, it's just, you're kind of just describing what it's like to be a human, though, when he was talking about, like, pain being a catalyst for learning things or something. I'm trying to remember the context of this, but I was like, no, pain isn't what teaches us what makes us human. Pain is just a side effect of being human, Mm-hmm. I'm not one of those people that really believes that trauma and pain teach us anything. I think they teach us how to react to things, and those teachings aren't always good. That's why PTSD exists. Yeah. And I mean, it teaches us that people hurt us and people, abandon us and that kind of stuff when you have trauma, especially as a young child. So there was this big, long kind of philosophical thought about pain teaching us, and I don't believe in that. I don't think pain teaches us good stuff. I think it teaches us bad things. I don't think we'd necessarily be worse off as a society if we were able to do away with physical and emotional pain.
There is value in the psychological aversion to pain, particularly for like young humans learning, okay, the stove is hot, don't touch it because that hurts.
Right.
But it does kind of have a knock-on effect later in life, where it's just like, okay, yes, I get it, I'm in pain, but there's nothing I can do about it. Can you shut that off, please?
Right. And that doesn't even have to be like a cut on your arm. It can be physical, emotional pain as well. Yeah. Like, it's like, because your brain, our brains are just electrified meat and they're doing their best, Oh, I'm sorry. Before I do, I almost forgot something. We saw Tasha.
Oh, yeah. On the actually, that probably was because it was the psychological test where they had Graves as Data sit down and stare at a series of images. And one of them was Tasha. And I my thought when I saw Tasha there was, well, that's going to be a big giveaway because he's not going to have an emotional reaction
to Tasha. He's not going to know who she is. Yeah. And then my other Tasha joke of the episode was that when he goes in to talk to Brienne and like grabs her hand and stuff, I was like, oh, she's going to find out he's fully functional. And then we saw Tasha a little bit later and I was like, and I thought that was, I thought either that was really clever writing or just a happy coincidence to have the first time that Data, even if it's not Data, but the actor is showing like interest in another woman, they had two different they had that reference to Tasha being there because like you said before, it was pivotal to him. It's probably the first time he's been with a human woman, right?
Yeah. There's also one thing I noticed, basically the way they tell you that, yes, he has in fact transferred into Data is when he walks into the turbo lift whistling, "If I Only Had a Heart."
Right.
That was kind of a double hint, too, for people who remember in Encounter at Farpoint, the first time we meet Data, he is, well, not the first time we meet Data, the first time Riker meets Data, he's on the holodeck trying to whistle. Pop Goes the Weasel. But he can't whistle.
That's right.
He's bad at it.
So that was a tell.
But Graves can whistle because he's been doing it all his life, but Data can't. So it was like when Lore was trying to impersonate Data, but Lore uses contractions and Data doesn't.
Right. Okay. Yeah. No, that's clever. Yeah. I do like the eulogy. I mean, if you're going to write your own eulogy, at least it was, it was pleasant. And I love the way that Brent Spiner did it. Like, I just thought he was so into it. So, if you could arrange for him to come read that at my funeral, I'd be okay with that. He could just come recite that bit of the episode at my funeral.
So what you're saying is you plan on going before Brent? I think he's much older than you.
Yeah. I'm always planning my funeral. I have been my whole life. My friend Amber has a whole list of things she's supposed to do at my funeral. I think that's pretty much it, though. No! I forgot to bring up the. Did I do anything that was unbecoming of a Starfleet officer? And that was like, I loved that line so much.
And Riker, the stinker that he is, he's like, oh, does wrestling with a Klingon Targ ring a bell?
I know. I thought that was great. He's such a dad. I thought that was so funny.
Then Data's like, did I win?
Yeah, he just took it at face value. And in this episode, especially following up, Armus killing comedy last episode that we did, I'm really glad that they had Data have the line of, I've had a hard time understanding what's funny. Yeah, no crap, buddy. We've been on that journey with you. But yeah, I love that line. And I do, to be honest, I like when it comes back to like a ha-ha joke on the bridge moment now. The first couple of times it happened, I was kind of like thrown off by it because it's not something that typically happens in a drama where at the end we have like a jolly old laugh about something.
It's a very TOS way to end an episode. They always ended their shows on a joke.
Yeah, but like, I don't know. I kind of like it. Maybe it's because of the TOS, though, Mm-hmm. But I mean, I don't know. I liked both of these episodes. I really liked the first one, and I thought this one was really interesting, even if I hated the dude. I really liked the philosophical discussions behind it. And then I liked the whole future of what are we going to do when we can download consciousness into bodies and stuff like that. I don't know. All of I love when it brings up philosophical things that I have to think about, So thanks for joining us today. I'm Ari.
And I'm GayFesh.
And until next time,
live long and prosper.
Thanks for watching.
Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and ring the bell to get notified when new episodes come out.
We're on Twitter at Rest Both Worlds.
Join our Patreon at patreon.com/restofbothworlds for bonus content and hear your name at the end of each episode.